So let's now get started with Redux Toolkit, and for that I'll quit my dev server and then npm install @redux.js/toolkit. That is simply the package name. You also find this in the official docs. So we execute this, and this will then install this Redux.js toolkit package. Now, when you install that, you then thereafter can also uninstall Redux, so the Redux library itself, because that is already included in Redux toolkit. So you could now remove this Redux entry here from package.json. Now with it installed, we can restart the development server. And now the question is how we use Redux Toolkit. Well, we do use it here in this store folder in the index.js file, because Redux Toolkit simplifies a couple of aspects of working with Redux. And let's start with the reducer and also indirectly with the actions. Here at the top in the index.js file, we can import something from @redux.js/toolkit, and that something is the create_slice function. There also is a create_reducer function, which would also allow us to create a reducer with certain enhancements, but create_slice is even more powerful than create_reducer, and it will simplify a couple of aspects in one go. Now, once we imported it, we can call it. We can call create_slice here, and I will call it below my initial state object. And then create_slice wants an object as an argument. Now, what we do with create_slice is we are preparing a slice of our global state. And when we have different pieces of state which are not directly related, let's say an authentication status and the counter status, we could create different slices, potentially also in different files, to make our code maintainable. Now here we only have counter related state, and I would say that the counter and show counter belong kind of together, so I will create one slice for now. Now every slice needs a name, an identifier of that piece of state, so to say. And here I'll name this counter, but the name is up to you. It doesn't have to be this name here, it can be any name you want. Next, you need to set up an initial state. And here I want to set my initial state equal to that object, or I therefore just point at initial state, so at this constant, and use that constant's value as a value. Or we even use modern JavaScript syntax, omit this part, and let JavaScript behind the scenes automatically expand it to this code again. So with that, we're setting the initial state of this state slice to this initial state. And then we also need to add reducers. Reducers is again an object, a map, you could say, of all the reducers this slice needs, this state slice needs. Now here in this object, you can now simply add methods with any names of your choice, though those names will become important later. And here I'll add an increment method, I will add a decrement method, I will add an increase method, and I will also add my toggle counter method, let's say. So 4 methods, because I had 4 different if cases in my reducer before. Now every method here will then automatically receive the latest state. These methods will be called for you by Redux, and they will receive the current state. Also to the action, and we'll use that in a second, but actually here we don't need the action because these methods will automatically be called for you depending on which action was triggered. So we don't need to write our own if checks anymore. Instead, we'll soon be able to identify these different reducers and dispatch actions that target these different reducers. So we now don't have to write our own if checks anymore, which also reduces some boilerplate code we would have to write otherwise. Now in these methods here, in the reducers map, we now also can do something else than we did before. Now here we are allowed to mutate the state. So here we can set state.counter for example, for incrementing it. Now, this was forbidden before, and I emphasized that it is forbidden. I also did emphasize it because here it seems to be allowed. But the important part is the word seems. We still must not manipulate the existing state. But the good thing is, when using Redux Toolkit and its functions like create slice, we can't accidentally manipulate the existing state. Because Redux Toolkit internally uses another package called immer, which will detect code like this and which will automatically clone the existing state, create a new state object, keep all the state which we're not editing, and overwrite the state which we are editing in an immutable way. So we still have immutable code here, even though it doesn't look like it because of this internally used package. And therefore, we as a developer have a much easier time working with Redux because we don't have to create a copy manually and keep all the code we're not changing. Instead, we just change the code we want to change, and internally it's translated into immutable code. Therefore, in decrement, we execute state.counter --, and here for increase, we now need a payload. We now need extra data. So how does that work? Now, when using Redux Toolkit, we of course can still have reducers that listen to actions that have an extra payload, extra data. Because these reducer functions here don't just receive the state, they also still do get the action. We just don't need to accept it in the other two reducers because we don't need to do anything with the action in there. But now here, if we need some data that's attached to the action, then we can still accept it as a parameter and use it in the reducer function, in the reducer method. So therefore now I can set state counter equal to state counter plus action.amount. So basically what I did down here as well. Now again in this mutable looking way, which isn't really mutating the state. Now for toggle counter, we don't need an action payload. Here we just get the state and set state.showCounter equal to not state.showCounter to invert this value. So now we created this slice, and writing that code is certainly quite convenient and shorter than what we had to do down there. But how do we now make our store aware of that slice? How do we use that slice? And how do we then dispatch actions against this slice?